Welcome everyone to our Dhammapada discussion. This is the third week. I borrowed somebody's sheet. So last week we started chapter 2 of the Dhammapada, and that was vigilance. Remember last week one of the before we get started, I'll just go around and everybody introduce themselves by first name or Dharma name, whichever you prefer. So I'm Bupmi.
Kelly.
Steve.
Alex Buphane.
Nancy Yapu.
Lyle.
Nikki Shingyo.
Les Shingyo.
Yeah, Greg. Bill.
Okay, very good. Thank you all again for being here. So like I was saying, last week we left just really starting to scratch the surface of chapter 2 on vigilance. And I remember we left just as we were starting, one of the themes that we were discussing and talking about was this idea of even the first sentence of the first verse, be vigilant and go beyond death. So I just want to give some space and some time if anybody had any reflections or anything that resonated this past week that you saw, manifest in your life from any verse or any concept or idea in this chapter. If anybody wanted to kick things off, or Steve? Yeah.
The very last line of this I thought was kind of neat. Such seekers will never fall back. They are nearing nirvana. The reason I found that kind of striking was that, depending on who you're talking to, which Buddhist you're talking to, there's different versions of nirvana. In Rinzai, they say you can have an instant enlightenment, it's available now. Soto says it's a slowly developing process. Jin Yule, the founder of the Chogyay order, said it's sudden enlightenment followed by gradual practice. The Dalai Lama said you won't be a Buddha in this lifetime, so keep practicing. But here we have someone saying you are nearing nirvana. So rather than looking at things as a dualistic state, either non-enlightened or enlightened, here we have someone saying, oh, you're nearing nirvana. It's a new state, sort of. I found that kind of nice. Almost intimate in the way that it kind of comes in there at the end.
Did you notice or make any connection with your own life or practice, this idea?
Yeah. It makes me more comfortable not knowing I'm not enlightened, but knowing I'm not completely unenlightened either. Kind of makes me more secure in the present moment.
So it's kind of really encouraging in some way, right?
Right.
Yeah. We'll never fall back. They're nearing nirvana.
Exhortation.
It's hopeful.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Any other reflections, insights?
Yeah, I thought this chapter's titled Vigilance, but there's actually two terms that are used very frequently throughout these verses. There's vigilant, but even more frequently there's earnest.
It's in every paragraph.
Earnestness, yeah.
At least once.
Yeah.
And to me, vigilance refers to being watchful or on guard, or it really refers to, I think, being mindful, very mindful all the time of what you're doing, that you are, doing what you need to do to reach nirvana, and that you're not falling back. And that earnestness is really more about intent and why you're doing it, and that you're doing it for your enlightenment, and not because you think it makes you better than other people, or whatever bad intent you might have for doing practice. So I thought it was
Interesting,
interesting
yeah.
that, although, vigilance is the title, there's really more to it than just vigilance.
Or kind of maybe a earnest vigilance too, right? That just kind of dawned on me,
Or
right?
vigilant earnestness.
Right? Yeah. So it goes kind of maybe these two kind of
Hand in-
qualities,
hand in hand.
right? Like two sides of a coin or something like that, right? And vigilance, right? Being, I like you said, like being watchful, right? So that kind of awareness, right, is another way to maybe think about it. We're watchful to what or of what?
I think it refers, there's only two references really linguistically that gave me the clue. You're supposed to watch for sloth and lust.
Mm.
So in other words, don't be lazy, but don't get caught up in the rain. and comes from
Yeah,
the roof.
they talked about it in chapter 1, right? Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it mean vigilance with regard to practice?
How do you interpret it, or how do you see it?
That's what I see it as, I guess I interpret it, it's making sure that you don't fall away from practice.
Mm-hmm. So something about
And
the practice of, walking the path that maybe requires some kind of watchfulness or
Right.
heedfulness, right, is another term or concept we see, in the
You can't-
Dhammapada
you
and
don't wanna
other
be like a
sources, right?
zombie, right? Essentially, you want to do it, and that's where, I guess, earnestness comes
Right.
into play.
So kind of intentionality,
Right.
authenticity to the
Doing
practice
things
of,
for the right reasons.
right, the motivation, right? Yeah, all these things kind of tied in together, that not just necessarily going through motions or following a template or a script, but that there's a maybe authentic, some piece of authenticity to it. Right. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really the theme of this whole chapter, right? Is you said, Shingyo, you see this like in every paragraph, right? It's really driven home at least once, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a really important theme, it seems to be, that there's only 26 chapters in the Dhammapada, and at least from what I've been able to find, the chapters themselves, some people believe that they're not arranged in any particular order per se. But it's interesting, in most of the modern collections that we have, that, most of them appear in the same order across the various translations, and this being the second chapter, I think also, I see that as meaningful in some way, that this is idea that's really early on in the Dhammapada, right? Maybe this kind of vigilance carrying through, approaching the rest of the collection as well too, of having some kind of purpose to it.
I found it all interesting also that in the first chapter he compares Mara to a fire, or actually, excuse me, that was in his third sermon, but here
Mm-hmm.
the aspirant is compared to a fire at the end. He advanced like fire. So I think that's interesting. The last
Which
line 31.
verse, or 31? Okay, so this is,
Yeah, but
yeah, toward the end there, yeah.
even more so, what I've really been thinking
Mm.
about is when we were talking about the first chapter,
Mhm.
and I don't remember your name, but there's the mention of the concept of beyond death in the first chapter, which was kind of baffling a lot of us. Definitely it
Yeah.
reaches the status of a public case. So I came across an article in Tricycle this week, and what they were doing was, in an article called Birth and Death, quoting Dogen, the founder of Soto. He wrote he published something called the Shobogenzo, 95 Dharma talks, essentially. They were compiled after his death. And one of his talks called Shoji, which is a contraction of the word Sho, which means birth, and Ji, which means death, into one word. He said this, and I think it's really interesting, because it's it's an explanation of what beyond death means
Mm.
to him. And he, by the way, he's the guy that sort of coined the term beyond thinking to describe Zazen. So I wanted to share this 'cause I thought it was really brilliant. He wrote, just understand that birth and death is itself nirvana. There's nothing such as birth and death to be avoided. There's nothing such as nirvana to be sought. Only when you realize this are you free from birth and death. It is a mistake to suppose that birth turns into death. Birth is a phase that is an entire period of itself with its own past and future. For this reason, in Buddha Dharma, birth is understood as no birth. Death is a phase that is an entire period of itself with its own past and future. For this reason, death is understood as no death. In birth, there is nothing but birth, and in death, there's nothing but death. Accordingly, when birth comes, face and actualize birth, and when death comes, face and actualize death. Do not avoid them or desire them. It's a different way of framing the conceptual experience of birth and death, and I found it really striking. He also ended this Dharma talk with a paragraph that essentially is like a paraphrase of the last paragraphs of the first chapter of the Dhammapada, essentially saying, lead a good life, don't lie, don't be lazy, meditate, back to the basic stuff, after that kind of remarkable explanation of birth and death.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, Dogen's writings is, and, you know, different from what we're reading here, and you know, that I resonate with that too, but obviously it's a little bit different than what we're trying to get out of here, but thank you for sharing that, Steve. Yeah.
Beyond
Yeah.
death, what's that mean?
Yeah, right.
Chapter?
Yeah.
I don't know if we've solved that or we might.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, but we see that this theme even of death and birth and death in the first two chapters, right? Because it came up in chapter 1, and here it is again in chapter 2. So we're starting to see this kind of thread, right, or the even centrality of it early on in the Dhammapada too, right?
So what is really meant by death? Is it really just the circle of birth and death, and then we're breaking that at some point?
That's part of, I don't know, I can't answer it right now, Lyle, but it's a complicated you know, idea and concept. Steve shared, you know, what some of the writing in Dogen, right, who is the founder of an entire Zen school of Buddhism back in the like 13th, 14th century, or no, earlier than that, right? Yeah, 12th.
1230.
Yeah. So it's something I think concept and experience that is a perennial issue for us to try to figure out ourselves of what that means in our lives, as we can, you know, hear, you know, teachings and words, but, you know, having to reconcile that or try to understand in some way can sometimes be difficult to do and confusing to do. So yeah, we could spend an entire lifetime trying to understand Dogen and all his writings, you know. But yeah, I think part of this, like I said the first week, that there's going to be ideas and concepts and passages, some which may feel pretty straightforward and easy to understand, and some that are going to be a lot more challenging that we'll have to wrestle with and may not be able to reconcile in a first reading or, you know, within the span of a 40-minute conversation, right? So the ones that do kind of nag at you, I'd say, you know, continue to reread those and reflecting those, and at different points and stages of life, it, you know, you'll may find your own insight about what that means. So I don't know what it means for you. I can't tell you what it means. Yeah. So for me, there was, I mean, a lot of the verses in chapter 2, and this was a shorter chapter than the first chapter this week, but one that resonated a lot with me this week was verse 28, which is on page 110 in the translation that we're using. Overcoming sloth through earnestness, the wise climb beyond suffering to the peaks of wisdom. And I think I said the past 2 weeks, I'm one who really gets a lot of, I think, both inspiration and enjoyment out of metaphors and analogies and the visual piece of a lot of these comparisons that the Buddha makes. Sloth is definitely one of the hindrances that I wrestle a lot with in my life. Although I consider myself a pretty lazy individual, I don't think a lot of people around me in my life would agree with that kind of perspective. But how that came out for me this week was in a few things like I had at work that I've just been procrastinating and putting off for some time because I just didn't want to do it. And this helped, in my daily reading this to motivate me to see that pattern in myself and even be more cognizant of what I was putting off and procrastinating. And I really didn't have any good reason to do that. So then finally, working on addressing the thing that was waiting for me. And through doing that, it almost was as if that kind of climbing the mountain, right? Because through, working on the project that I was putting off, other things kind of opened up in that space with some of the relationships that I have at work and things like that. So this really, for me, kind of almost was realized from this. So it was really interesting to see that, and I could see that correlation with that metaphor of climbing the mountain. Being vigilant and working on the thing that I had put off, there were new opportunities that opened up. So that's something that I noticed in my own life this week that I was grateful for, that the Dhammapada helped to kind of inspire me to do.
I think
Yeah,
one of the
Bubba.
other things that I think it's significant that it's very early in the Dhammapada. He's already talking about the strength of the meditation. It comes up at the second chapter, and that's the road that we have to take. And what I have seen since we started doing this little exercise is that I've been meditating a little bit more because I read this and I thought, hey, I'm supposed to be meditating. I don't mean to be lazy, but I've got to meditate more, and so.
So it's an interesting point of the practice, right? I think by, because I think my last reading of the Dhammapada, I can't even remember exactly when it was, but it's been a while, right? It's not something that I, read, say, like all the time, right? So maybe like that I actually went through it and was like kind of using it as like a spiritual practice kind of reading, right? To meditate on it was probably at least a few years ago, right? So it's interesting you draw that by reading this. You were also motivated to, hey, I need to meditate more, kind of, right? Which is the same thing that I kind of was just saying, that like reading about, this hindrance of sloth and seeing that, it's like, okay, I'm gonna, so, kind of one of the fruits of the practice is interesting by, immersing oneself in, the sutras and the Dhammapada and things like that, how they can be, a catalyst and a motivator for practice, right? Of putting your mind, body, heart, into that. It, has that kind of like the aura of the incense, right? Like that, it spreads, that it's kind of infectious in a way that by reading this, that reinforces the practice, and then vice versa too. It's like that positive feedback loop, right? The more then you do that, then, nearing nirvana, right? Like the end of chapter 2. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Bill. Yeah. Anything else in chapter 2 that stuck out to anybody, or whether it was something you saw in your life or something confusing or just something that you liked or didn't like about it at all? Do we feel like we want to move on to chapter 3?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Seeing some nodding. All right. So chapter 3 is called Mind. This one's not too long, so what we usually do, I'll just read it out loud, and then you can follow along if you have your translation with you. And then we'll start reflecting on this. So chapter 3, Mind. As an archer aims an arrow, the wise aim their restless thoughts. Hard to aim, hard to restrain. As a fish hooked and left on the sand thrashes about in agony, the mind, being trained in meditation, trembles all over, desperate to escape the hand of Mara. Hard it is to train the mind, which goes where it likes and does what it wants. But a trained mind brings health and happiness. The wise can direct their thoughts, subtle and elusive, wherever they choose. A trained mind brings health and happiness. Those who can direct thoughts, which are unsubstantial and wander so aimlessly, are freed from the bonds of Mara. They are not wise whose thoughts are not steady and minds not serene, who do not know Dharma, the law of life. They are wise whose thoughts are steady and minds serene, unaffected by good and bad. They are awake and free from fear. Remember, this body is like a fragile clay pot. Make your mind a fortress and conquer Mara with the weapon of wisdom. Guard your conquest always. Remember that this body will soon lie in the earth without life, without value, useless as a burned log. More than those who hate you, more than all your enemies, an undisciplined mind does greater harm. More than your mother, more than your father, more than all your family, a well-disciplined mind does greater good.
That was pretty powerful.
Mm.
That whole reading is extremely powerful.
Mhm.
The imagery of the fish hooked and flopping on the sand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I first started meditating, and I actually started to watch my thoughts because I was meditating, I realized that, I kind of likened my mind to a hive of bees, always wanting to, do things and always working and always, I gotta be doing something, gotta be doing
Yeah.
something, gotta be doing something, and it was like, I couldn't stop it because, that's kind of the way I've been living my life, always gotta be doing something, always gotta be doing something. And, finally after, it's been almost 2 years now, I kind of feel like, yeah, that's calmed down a bit. A bit. So,
A few less bees.
the bees are kind of sleeping, that's kind of like I blew some smoke in there and they're sleeping now. Okay, so, but if I don't keep it up, they're gonna start, they're gonna go again. So,
Mm.
This is just very powerful to remind me that, training the mind is really how important it really is. It's kind of the key to everything. When he repeats that, a trained mind brings health and happiness, Okay, that kind of drives the point home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is powerful imagery, right? The one there about the fish on the hook. I've heard lots of metaphors and ways to describe the activity of the mind. I haven't heard the beehive one before, but I like that one too. But ones that we talk about often, especially like in Zen circles, are like the monkey mind. And to me, the monkey mind is a really like fun, kind of cute. Like I imagine these carefree monkeys, just jumping around, having fun, kind of leisurely, and it's like, oh, that's not so bad. It's you go to the zoo and you see monkeys hopping around. It's like, oh, that's great. But a fish on a hook is a little bit different, trembling all over, right, in agony. That's a very different, or like a wandering puppy, right? Very different kind of energies there, right? Of the pleasant, happy-go-lucky, jumping around versus trembling and thrashing in agony. Yeah, strong imagery, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really appropriate analogy for the basic raw human mind that is just allowed to run free. I was using that same analogy with a friend this week, and then I realized, oh man, that was in the Dhammapada too.
The fish on the hook?
Right. Yeah, I had a really hard 2 years, so like 6 months ago it was detached from people and basically having to live with my thoughts all the time, not practicing much. I definitely felt like a fish flopping around. I feel much better now. I feel like I'm in the water again now.
Can breathe.
Yeah.
I can relate too, like going back 20 years or so ago when I went to the first Buddhist temple. I went because I am an anxious person and I wanted to learn just to settle that, but those first moments meditating, it was extremely uncomfortable. It was just like so hard to sit, and that was, we sat for like 45 minutes straight, so it was long sittings, and I felt like I was getting like heartburn, like
Yeah, almost like a panic attack or something, huh?
yeah, it was really tough. But then over the years, and when I used to come here, probably more like 10 years ago, like I got really hardcore. It was a tough time in my life, but I was able at that point to get really steady, and amazing things were like happening within. But it is something you need to practice, because like now I'm kind of out of practice again, and again the mind is busy. But I do think even so, the things I've learned have carried forth as far as just being mindful in general.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
One of the other images or kind of comparisons that comes to mind for me is, and I use this sometimes when I'm teaching in other contexts, if you had like a little vial or jar with water and like sand or dirt in it, and you shake that up, the water gets cloudy and dirty, right? And you can't see through it because there's all this activity and movement and restlessness going on. But just setting that, imagine that little jar or vial down with the stillness, the sand or the whatever's in that glass that is muddying up the water settles, and then you have that transparency and that clarity, and you can see through it. So that's another way I imagine that, and connects with a lot of the instruction here in this chapter about some of the themes that pop up, like the picking particular verses, right? But the steadiness, serenity of mind. That makes sense to me. That resonates a lot there.
Yeah, I think it's also remarkable that in the last 2 lines, he prioritizes a disciplined mind. It's more important than your mother, father, or family. And more dangerous than any of your enemies. I've never really heard anybody speak about it like that, so
Mhm.
he's definitely set forth his priorities there.
Does those last verses that Steve just mentioned, did anybody else, did that pick up on that kind of priority there, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they say your mind could be your worst enemy, which is certainly true.
Right, yeah.
Balance within is what that
Yeah.
phrase.
Well, it's what we live with all the time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Our mind.
Mm-hmm. More than your mother, more than your father, more than all your family, well-disciplined mind does greater good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I raised cats. I've got a couple of rescue cats that were feral, and I socialized them. And I was thinking of my own analogy this week about writing at the Dhammapada. I felt like my mind is like a feral cat that needs to be socialized.
Mm.
You know, it's if you're gentle enough with it, your mind comes around and works for you.
Maybe probably requires a lot of patience too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a process,
Definitely.
right? It's not like a overnight kind of socialization, right?
Right. Yeah.
Takes time. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
The line I liked was, they are wise whose thoughts are steady and mind serene, unaffected by good and bad.
Yeah.
I ain't there yet.
I don't know many people that are.
I got work to do.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a motivating or inspiring.
Yeah, you know,
There's moments of that.
put your mind on it anyway.
Yeah, I like that, yeah, good and bad. I think the Rig Veda
Yeah.
has a line that says, do not be pleased by perfume nor be disgusted by filth. Sort of the same thing, it's like, don't overreact to the good, don't overreact to the bad, keep them tempered.
Yeah. And that's the same thing, but I think that people who are not real familiar with what we're studying and what we're trying to do here, they think that attitude is just milquetoast. How can you won't experience any joy if everything is lukewarm. Well, that's not true at all.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is to enjoy everything right now here. You know, and that's why the meditation can help us get to it.
Yeah. I've had people, I tell them that, I'm a Buddhist monk or Zen priest and I, meditate and do all this stuff, I think a lot of people have this stereotype or image of a very stoic, robotic, stone-faced kind of person that is totally yeah, right? No. But that doesn't have any kind of emotive expression or anything and things like that. So when I say unaffected by good and bad, the word for me that I sit on is unaffected. Because it doesn't mean you don't acknowledge or experience, right? You can still experience good and bad, although, you could talk about that kind of discrimination, duality of labeling and categorizing and all of that anyway. But unaffected, I think, is the key. Where there you can still have that experience, but again, how do you react or respond to the ups and downs and different things like that? Because we still live in the phenomenal relative world, right? So, and I think I've met people and encountered people and I told them expect, to be kind of in the transcendent realm. I was like, the whole kind of point of our temple and our tradition, right? The muddy water, right? We still live in the, quote, real world, right? So there's the idyllic kind of thing and, the kind of, I guess, goalpost, if you will, right? So trying to create that, but I think we're still touched by good and bad, but being unaffected maybe be something different.
I think you're starting to get into then developing equanimity.
Right.
When you're unaffected by the good and the bad, impartial to
Mhm.
everything.
but it doesn't dismiss, like, doesn't extinguish the good and the bad, right? They still
No, yeah,
Still happen.
It's there.
mm-hmm.
It makes me think too about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tara Brach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 And she has that rain practice, so it's like being unaffected, and that's kind of what that practice is all about. Like
Mhm.
you're recognizing what's coming your way
Mhm.
and inquiring and accepting and then nurturing yourself,
Right.
and then you kind of
Yeah.
let go.
Yeah, I like the rain
I love
metaphor.
that.
I've taught that before too. Her schema for that.
Does she talk about the rain the way Buddha did in the first chapter here? I'm not familiar with Tara Brach.
I don't know where she. It's like a
It's an
Um,
acronym.
acronym that she
Yeah.
RAIN for
Yeah.
the recognize, what, accept, or for.
Investigate
Investigate.
and
And
then not
ner-
attach.
Yeah.
I think yeah, I've seen it a few different ways.
Yeah.
People have probably played with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One that two verses that I probably quote quite a bit in my work in the hospital and when I teach with the medical students is verses 40 and 41. This idea of these two really, again, strong images. Remember, this body is like a fragile clay pot, and remember that this body will soon lie in the earth without life, without value, useless as a burned log. Ever since I read those have really stuck with me. Yeah, and then when I have my intro to Buddhism kind of lecture, I have just a slide that has a bunch of burned, charred logs on it that I show. But that's also that I think is something very concrete and very specific view of the body that's different from a lot of other belief systems and traditions too. So that's something that that I think about quite a lot in my line of work. Working with people who are sick and injured and facing death all the time. So that I'm gonna have to try to see this week on chapter 3, maybe see how some of the other verses and ideas of this play in. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna be cremated, so I'm definitely gonna be as useless as a burned log.
You don't want to do like a Tibetan sky burial.
No, I'm gonna pass on that.
Okay.
What is that? I've never heard of
Yeah, it's illegal in my city.
I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah.
where you put out your body to feed the wildlife, and they come and
that. Okay.
do what they will, and
Oh, wow.
the vultures and all that. Yeah.
Complain.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but not to waste. Right. A little bit different view. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of strong imagery in this chapter. Sit with that. I'm training the mind. What else?
We had back to the hooked fish, I was talking to a friend, she's actually a minister now, and probably 25, 30 years ago, we went to a women's retreat and went to a meditation workshop, and it was the first time either one of us had done it.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I think we were talking about, like, you always feel like you're not making progress, and you're saying, oh, I'm far from this, and I think I was going along one of those lines about, I can't believe that I can't handle this stuff after so much practice. And she goes, do you remember that first meditation workshop we went to? And afterwards, it was like, we're never doing this again. I thought I was gonna run out of the room screaming, and we hated it. And then it was like another 10 years before I ever did it again. So, obviously I've made progress. I just forgot how it was that first time.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't taken Prozac in 14 years.
Probably a lot of us can remember if we think back our first times, especially maybe in a retreat format or a 45-minute sitting or something where it was the first time walking in. And I think I can remember.
I'm
person.
intimidated by that, actually. I haven't
Yeah.
done that yet.
Yeah.
The first time I did a 3-day
Mhm.
retreat here, and muddy waters in.
Mm-hmm.
And on the last day, I was like, this is torture. I can't believe he would do this to me. And
Yeah, right.
I was like, what is the point of being so mean to us? And, like, and then afterwards, it was like, this is great. This is wonderful. But it's
But really, all you were invited to do was to sit with yourself, right?
yeah, but it was like, I really was very, very, on the last day, I was like really angry about the whole process and stuff. So, but it took like 3 days because you go through a lot, you know, and
Mhm.
you're all over the place.
Yeah.
But I was
We
like,
should do that again.
But
How
then
long
how
do you truly
quickly,
sit in 3 days?
Hmm?
12 hours a day?
No,
it's
not that long.
it wasn't that long, but it was interspersed with like work and doing
Meals
different
and
things, but
stuff,
It's long.
and-
It's
yeah.
long. You're still hours,
Yeah.
hours a day, and but how quickly, like I had those thoughts, and then when it was over, like an hour later, I was like, this is the greatest thing. So I went from like, I hate you, this is torture, to this is the greatest thing.
You went from anger after 3 days. I did it after 3 hours.
Yeah.
Just the mini retreats. I'm like, you get angry. You're like, come on, really? It's been like 3 hours.
I always think, did the bell keeper like fall asleep or something? You know?
But just even show how quickly, how your emotions can go from one extreme to another.
Yeah. I remember like I'm not going to remember the number now, but in my Dharma talk from a few weeks ago about how many moments are in a day, it was like 64 billion or something absurd number like that, right? So how many moments in a 3-day retreat, right? Like hundreds of billions of moments where, and how many thoughts can you have in the span of a moment too? There's I didn't include it in my talk, but one of the visuals when I was prepping that was like, you know, talking about time and the mind and moments and all that. Imagine if you had this rope that was like of the finest, thinnest threads imaginable, right? And the time it would take if you were to cut this rope that had these, you know, millions and millions of threads to get like one fraction of the way through one thread of the rope, you know, has the capacity to contain, you know, an infinite number of thoughts. It's like a crazy, just like unimaginable like amount. So hard it is to train the mind. Yeah, verse 35, the starting verse. Hard it is to train the mind, for sure. So.
The other thing on vigilance too is that at this retreat, which was a long time ago, like 12, 15 years ago, before we were taking order, and I had a friend drop me off here. I didn't bring my car, which was a good thing because I probably would have left if I did. But at the end, he really thanked everybody for not leaving, and I thought, boy, it was a good thing I didn't drive here.
See, next time we do a retreat, we'll have to do an off-site shuttle, so people can.
In a locked room.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a practice in a lot of, you know, Asian Buddhist community, and some here too, that do lock-in retreats. There's a word in Korean that I'm not gonna think of it. It's like mu. I'm not gonna try to remember, but there's a word for like basically you lock yourself in for a set period of time, and some monks have locked themselves in for years, and like, you know, they can't get out. It's literally they're imprisoned in their meditation room. Like that, one of the temples I know on the west side of the state does do like these intensive like solo, basically you're in a room by yourself. They don't lock you in, right? But the idea is you could go in for, you know, a one room little place for like a week, and that would be a pretty intense practice. I'm not necessarily encouraging anybody to do that right now because you got to be ready to do,
Practice for being in solitary confinement.
Sure, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, but there's, you know, when you do those week-long or 7-day silent retreats, and they can be brutal at times, but when you come out of it, you're on a kind of a little bit different plateau of your meditation. And that's what's so wonderful, I think, about meditation, or at least is, because when I started meditating about 14, 15 years ago, it started to work fairly well pretty quickly. I mean, I felt a change in my feelings, my moods, I guess. And it kept changing over time. And now it's a lot different than it was And so, I mean, the insights, I think, well, why didn't I have that, 15 years ago, that insight or something like that? So, anyway, and just,
Yeah.
it progresses well.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely for me, the imagery of the fish on the hook is something that I think might stick with me this week coming up. So,
It kind of scared me. So I haven't experienced that yet with meditation. I definitely experienced the mind just
yeah.
quivering, but it's not painful. It's just
Yeah. Say most people seem to report, if you meditate long enough, you will have a kind of experience that's unpleasant and difficult to sit through. Just the nature of our minds and our lives and our histories and our stories and emotions and everything else that comes up. So I say, do it long enough.
Is that just restlessness that hits you? It's a
No, it
different
could be-
sort of-
It's that
It
too.
could be boredom too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meditation is boring sometimes. It really can be, but,
Focus on your breathing, okay.
no, but that's just it, that's what you do. Is you sit with the boredom,
Mm-hmm.
and I am experiencing
Yeah.
boredom.
Yeah.
know,
So you're doing a meditation series. Are you're doing the meditation series, or is that Bupchan that's doing the coming up?
Buckshot doing that, right?
Oh, is that next month? I think.
Oh, I don't know, I gotta talk to Alex about that.
Oh, okay.
I think you put me down for April. We're good with it. I just need to make sure I know the topic.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I think for anybody, you talk to anybody that's been meditating for a little while, most people will have had,
Yeah.
sittings and experiences of
It can
differing.
stir up
Really
stuff
hard.
that's
Sure.
real deep with it.
Sure.
It can be, yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, there's some people don't want to sit with themselves and their thoughts and their minds. And so, it's in a way to cope with the overwhelmingness of that, stop looking at their minds because it's too difficult, depending on what comes up or what space you go into. So there's kind of a fork in the road, so to speak, right? If you decide if you're going to continue to sit there with whatever it is that's coming up for you, or it's too much and you have to, get up and go do something else. So there's always a point, and I think, again, vigilance and I mean, a lot of the stuff in the Dhammapada that we'll look at, but it's earnestness, vigilance, the mind, having some kind of supports to help give some, and I know we're getting close to time here over time, some confidence in that practice of continuing to sit with all that is. Dogen writes a lot about this, but again, that's maybe more advanced, kind of writing to parse out. And many other great teachers and ancestors in our traditions and even contemporary writers talk about that. But there comes a point where it is going to be really, really hard, and only you can decide what you're going to do at that point. So yeah, I'll just say if you continue sitting, it'll come sooner or later.
Or,
So
or start sitting a little bit more with other people too.
that helps.
That's a commitment. When you say you're gonna sit with somebody,
Hmm.
you gotta be there. And so then you do it.
Yeah.
It helps a little bit.
Yeah, and also having support. Some people choose to have the support of a teacher or spiritual advisor or guide. So a lot of us here can help that have some a little bit more experience, but different paths to help in that way too. So that's always an option as well. So.
For me, the flopping fish experience doesn't come when I'm meditating, it comes afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The longer I've meditated, the more layers I've been able to penetrate my mind, and it's
Yeah.
when I'm not meditating and I'm in life, it's when I notice all these habitual conditioned responses I have, and it's
Yeah.
frustrating to see them come up, after spending an hour and a half sitting, suddenly, how does it come up? Maybe you want to run a
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah,
You know, all-
sure.
Yeah, so that's the frustrating part, when you realize just how, uncontrollable the mind is, you know, sometimes.
And to
like-
take, you know-
like a can of worms.
Yeah.
You know, the worms
Yeah.
sleep sometimes, but sometimes they wake up.
Yeah.
So-
Kind of take on that same metaphor, almost like it sounds like in some cases, like the meditation space would be like the comfortable kind of fishbowl, right, where you can breathe. But then when you go outside, you know, your cushion or chair or wherever out into the world, then you're out of the water and kind of flapping around, huh? So
That's when you really see your mind in action.
yeah, what they say, what's the famous thing, like if you want to check to see if you're enlightened, spend a week with your family.
Yeah.
Especially the conservative ones.
Any of them, right?
And I have a lot of those.
You
All right, let's. We're a few minutes over, but if y'all have a few minutes, we'll just end with a 5-minute sitting to bookend our time here. Well, before we do that sitting, I forgot we have the closing gatha on the back of our sheets here. So this is a little bit shorter one. So we'll just read this together and then we'll do our closing short sitting. The Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. Now we see this, hear this, receive and maintain this. May we completely realize the Buddha's true teaching, and may the merit of our practice, our study, and our efforts penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together may realize the Buddha way. Again, thank you all so much for taking the time to share your some of your Thursday evening together. So this coming week we'll focus on chapter 3, and then we'll be here again next Thursday to continue in the same format.